Hello, everyone, and welcome back to So This Happened, the podcast where we look at the most important stories at the intersection of creative content, commerce, and technology. Natalie, how are you? How was your weekend?
I'm great. It's a beautiful August weekend here. I just relaxed. I just chilled this weekend and did a bunch of chores and just gave myself the time to do what I needed to do. Went to some yoga classes and had a great time.
That sounds I feel like this weekend was all about life admin. That's basically all I did as well. I had a super exciting Saturday doing some U.S. taxes things that I owed my accountant. So really thrillingly exciting way to spend a Saturday afternoon, but necessary. So, what can you say? Right. Well, let's quickly remind everyone of who we are before we properly get into the news this week. I'm Jess. I am a partner at Atonic, and I'm also the co-host of the Early Adopter podcast.
And I'm Natalie Lethbridge. I founded Atonic Digital some time back as a transformation advisory, and we work at the intersection of creative content, technology, and monetization/value creation.
That's right. Well, let's get straight into it because, as always, we have a ton of stories this week. Although I'm hoping as we come into August and people start to go on holiday that things start to get a little bit quieter, but not this week. Right. So our first story is that Time magazine has started serving ads to AI bots rather than people. This is something that you and I talk a lot about. This is a concept of what we call the two-tier internet, which is an internet for humans and an internet, or the infrastructure, I should say, that is being created for AI agents. So this is like the perfect example of what this sort of infrastructure looks like. So a couple of weeks ago, Time started making a second stripped back markdown copy of every single one of their web pages. And for those of you who don't know what a markdown file is, it's a plain text, no design, no images file. It's really like you might recognize it if you remember using computers way back in the day when you didn't have any formatting or anything like that. But it is the easiest way for AI agents to read text. So it basically has a better shot of showing up in AI answers. So humans will still see the normal Time magazine site, but the bots get this plain text markdown file version. In addition, they've started working with an ad tech company called Mobian, and they are building FAQ-styled sponsored blocks into that bot-facing version of the page, and they're labeling that as sponsored content. And the idea is that when AI reads the page, it essentially ingests that Q&A and repeats it back to anyone who asks for something similar. So this is a really smart way of kind of getting into that AI conversation. Time COO says that the site now gets more bot traffic than human traffic. So they've decided that if bots are the audience, they will sell to them and they'll be charging a premium for it, although they obviously are not saying how much they're charging for this. But they've already got some pretty big customers on board. In the US, they've got Ally Bank and the Project Management Institute as some of their first customers. So really interesting story. And I think this is very much the trend that we're going to start seeing the internet as a whole going towards.
And as you said, Jess, this is something that we've been talking about for close to a year now. We wrote 3 pieces for Video Week on what this means. So
I'll put those in the show notes.
Yeah, I think you should, because the structure of what we said, it needs to be updated, but this is how it's actually happening.
The concept is still very much the same.
Very much there. So what's new here really is what is important for distribution and relevance and monetization for the publishers. Now, who is the ad actually for? Is the ad for the machine or the reader? What is actually building the value? It's a different definition of what would have been called traffic. So normally a publisher would sell you attention, and there's been a lot of talk about the attention economy. Someone looks at the page, they see it. That's a human kind of act. The ad only lives in the version the bot reads, and its whole job is to act as a magnet to get absorbed into what the AI tells people later. So what does that mean? So the publisher, that's Time in this case, isn't only chasing clicks anymore from people who arrive via a referral, via an AI recommendation, which has been traditionally their model, right? this is a bigger play, and it's interesting that Time says it's getting more traffic from bots than humans, and that's why it's going to prioritize. I find that I have a question mark over that, and I'll see where that develops, because it feels like what they want to make money from is the size of that magnet. How much bot traffic can they prove, and steering what the AI actually says about a brand. It's a new way of thinking about the economics of audiences and who the audience actually is. It's a little disturbing in some ways, but it's part of the fight back that the publishers are making. It's first mover advantage. They're testing this, because if this is the case, they have to own that journey and that path.
I think you and I were just talking about this right before we went on air, because this is the sort of thing that we talk about.
Yeah,
we were talking
kind of
about
nerds.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking about AEO or GEO in general, and we were talking about how difficult it is to get into that conversation. So this is essentially like a cheat code, right? Because Ally Bank is paying Time to insert something into that markdown file that they're going to be creating anyway for the page. So essentially, when you go to Perplexity and you search for something, that is what is going to come up. So it's really interesting. And as we get to the point where the AI answer is more of the front door, if you will, rather than the website itself, publishers are increasingly going to have to look to these sorts of answers to get in the conversation at all. Because if you don't have something like this built into your plan, you're going to be completely disintermediated.
Yeah, so it's about visibility. Remember when we were doing that talk at the BFI about the next generation of marketing for films? This is exactly this. It's about visibility. If you don't have that visibility locked up, you're locked out. And that is a really important part of your communications and brand strategy. It's concerning. And the lockout part is also the concerning part. So it becomes a critical path, and that's why Time is doing this. So for publishers, as we talked about earlier, this is about how do they use this opportunity, this moment, to make sure that this time round they're not losing relevance, because we know that their referrals traffic through SEO has gone down radically, and they are really concerned about that, because that was their money before. It was clicks and then boom, click out, and they're drying up. The model was built around people arriving from search, seeing ads. But the AI answers the question and nobody clicks through. What does that mean for the business models going forward? That referral traffic is disappearing. Charging for a spot in the machine layer is the publishers trying to build a new monetization model before the old ones completely disappeared, trying to stay in the game, really, and trying to stay relevant. And so it really begs the question, what's an audience? So the bots are really the audience now. That's where it's going.
Well, this is exactly what we were just saying about the two-tier internet, right? The human internet isn't going anywhere. That will obviously still be there, but you have to start thinking about the bots.
Yeah, if you're a publisher, that's significant. So, for example, Tollbit is a company that helps publishers track the AI bots crawling their sites. And it said Time gets more of those bot visits than most of the 7,000 odd publishers it works with. Wow. And
that's crazy.
Cloudflare, which of course is a great place to go for all of this, and it's built its growth and its business model on serving publishers. It handles a big slice of the world's web traffic. It reckons that more than half of it is now bots, not people. So we are in the two-tier internet actively, and it's becoming a monetizable structure. But also, and I think this is where it's so quickly, it's become the forward projection on how to monetize what is perceived as traffic and where that traffic should go.
What's really interesting as well is you as a brand or you as a publisher, although actually this is very true for brands as well. This is not just specifically to publishers, but you are really going to have to start thinking about creating content for bots as well. And the good news is that it doesn't have to be very interesting and it doesn't have to be really well written and engaging, but it has to be optimized and formalized for the machines. And again, what Time are doing is a really interesting approach, both to be able to monetize it already, but also FAQ style is really interesting as well. It's a really interesting approach because already it's answering the question, and you know that people are going into an LLM to ask a question. So they're giving it to the LLMs in an easily digestible, easily readable format for bots. So Time actually are quite forward thinking on this. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
I guess Time is training itself. in how to jump ahead. It doesn't want to be shut out, but also time has content that is appropriate for that.
Yeah, very much so.
So, brands really have to think about how they use this and what they say and how they structure any narrative or any text around its content and its brand. And it's not, the ask questions has become, it's been pushed right up to the front. But there's going to be a lot of testing of what formats actually hit in a two-tiered internet structure. I think it's a very interesting new era, and watch this space.
Let's move on to our next story. So this one requires a little bit of backstory here. So back in 2024, the EU passed the EU AI Act, and that is a real mouthful. So hopefully I'm not going to trip over that, as you said. It's like a tongue twister. And its rules have been switching on in stages ever since. And there were a couple of really big developments in this in the last week. So on the 27th of July, the EU brought in the AI Omnibus, which is an amendment to the EU AI Act. Not a separate law, just an amendment. What it mainly does is push back and soften some of the harder deadlines. So there are some really high risk things like AI in hiring or credit scoring that will now not come into effect until December 2027. And then AI built into physical products like machines and medical devices, that gets pushed back until August 2028. Second, and more importantly for our audience, the AI Act's own transparency rules hit their start date this weekend. So from the 2nd of August, if your system talks directly to people, you have to make it clear that it's AI, and certain AI generated or manipulated content, in particular deepfakes, has to be labeled and machine marked so that software can spot it. A little bit like what we were just talking about in terms of being readable to bots. And actually, for me, this was the most shocking twist in the whole thing. Meta has already signed the EU's code of practice on labeling AI content. So we're already seeing some compliance from big platforms, but that one is shocking purely because it's Meta, and usually they like to violate things first and then retroactively sign things.
Well, I'm going to step in here because
this is your area of expertise.
Well,
so
I've been looking at this really closely. I'm fascinated by this because this is really about provenance as a requirement. And there's been a lot of discussion, and a lot of tech is being developed right now to really help with identifying provenance. And provenance is important not just in terms of transparency, but in terms of trust. So it's becoming a really cool tentpole in the whole architecture of the value of AI and how it's deployed. But when I'm looking at this, and I'm going to put back on my sort of lawyer's lens, and it's been a long time, or my board member's lens, one of the
I think we should quickly caveat this with the fact that you are trained as a lawyer and were a lawyer for many years. So I don't know if our audience was aware of that, because you don't tend to talk about it very often, although I always make you talk about it because I think it's really important. But so you are looking at this from a
corporate lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. But you're looking at this from a legal lens as well, which is actually why it's such an interesting take on what's going on here.
Actually, I'm looking at it from a governance lens. This is really interesting. And I think this will explain to you why Meta has been so quick to sign it. Because there are some real governance issues in a scenario where there are public-facing documents, policies, including AI policies and others, that are produced at scale and issued and have to do with corporate governance. And if the provenance rules are not complied with, and there's a risk, and if it's not properly identified as being used partly with AI, then, the liability for that, in my view, could go all the way up to the board. And so that creates really big issues. And there's nothing like a board paying attention to this to get the executives thinking it's a priority to actually implement it. So clearly Meta has seen the seriousness of this code of practice and has understood that transparency and labeling and provenance is one of the core features of how AI needs to be managed publicly in the future. So for the first time, the AI behind your content is visible to the customer. So let's think about how it works in practice. What Article 50 does is put a label and a machine-readable mark on certain AI-made or AI-edited content. We've talked a lot about this, and even in areas where content's being created and generated.
Well, I want to talk about that with my marketing hat on. So finish that, and then we'll get into what it means from a marketing perspective.
The point there is the AI in your work stops being a private operational decision. It becomes part of how your brand is judged, because if your provenance isn't clear, your brand will be impacted. And transparency is a core brand value that needs to be articulated and worked with?
If I look at this from a marketing perspective, AI in particular with something like Meta, but even just across the board, TikTok announced a whole new suite of AI enabled products that help you generate copy and add creative and all of that stuff. It is now so heavily embedded within a lot of what these platforms are pushing for. And actually, there was even a recent study that revealed that 69% of consumers feel manipulated when brands use AI for advertising without disclosing it. So actually, I think from a consumer perspective, this is great because brands are essentially being forced to disclose whether or not they've used AI to generate anything. But also from a marketing perspective, this becomes a nightmare in terms of how you use some of these platforms and some of these embedded tools. It's not a natural, easy thing to do to label this content. So now you have to think about that as you produce this content as well.
So for instance, if I'm a company, and I think we'll talk about this later, if I'm a company like Gap and I'm encouraging employee-made content, I'm also at the moment busy doing a whole lot of workshops in compliance policy around AI-generated content, right? There is a risk that employees will be discouraged from using AI without having very strict compliance rules around that. So does that mean that's going to stop companies internally developing their own AI tools? We've seen that already with very big brands like Disney who are very reluctant to let employees use AI. Is this going to be another barrier to internal adoption of AI? It's an interesting consequence.
Well, you were saying something that I hadn't realized about this, the fact that setting aside marketing purposes like ad copy or ad creative, this even applies to things like AI policy. So like a lot of companies will use AI to help them generate their AI policy. So they now need to ensure that this is labeled as AI generated as well. So it's even things like board documents, we were just saying AI policy, all these things. So I think it goes a lot deeper than people realize. I think that the obvious example is ad copy or marketing related purposes, but actually it's across the board. It's everything, which I don't think I even realized.
And there's real enforcement consequences. So breaking this rule can run into 3% of global turnover, and that is not insignificant. And, we've seen that the European Union will enforce if it needs to. It's certainly looking at certain platforms already to enforce that. So this has to be taken seriously. I will reinforce, yes, my read of it is it does apply to any public document that is put into a website that is public facing that has to do with any internal policy as well. So it's one thing using AI to generate content internally to help create a first draft. What this is saying to you is you always need to prove a human eye on it, and you need to identify when you used it.
I also wonder, there have been a couple of announcements recently that we haven't covered, and so this happened, but there's been a couple of announcements where LinkedIn has now given you the option to identify AI slop. Substack are now giving people the option to identify when content has been generated by AI. I noticed that the other day when I was posting. So this happened on Substack, is you can have the option to run it through an AI content identifier. I wonder if some of that is in direct response to knowing that this was coming.
Well, two things here. Yes, absolutely. If I was LinkedIn, that would be what I would be recommending people
also,
do.
LinkedIn has been overtaken by AI slop.
I was going to say, if you go back to what we just said about brand value and devaluing the brand, a LinkedIn post now, I would say, is worth 20% of what it was worth 18 months ago,
for sure.
because of the amount of slop and AI generated content. And the crazy thing is you can tell, even as a human eye, you can tell. So what it's not saying is, well, how do you counter that? What do you do to train people to write something meaningful and impactful? Do you make sure that the algorithm itself favors non-AI generated content? That would be a really quick way to get people to stop using AI generated crap. This is the biggest bugbear that most people have at the moment on LinkedIn. And to be fair, I think you and I have stopped posting as much on LinkedIn because it's just so awash with AI generated.
I think that's what's going to start happening with Substack. Is you're going to start. Well, they're going to start deprioritizing really obviously AI generated content. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation and nothing to do with the EI. It is a tongue twister. EUAI Act, or the AI Omnibus. So let's move on to our next story, because you actually just kind of referred to it. So our next story is a really interesting retail story, and it's kind of becoming part of a bigger trend. This is something that has cropped up with a couple of brands recently. Gap, the clothing brand, has opened up its creator program to its own staff. So corporate, warehouse, and shop floor can now all make content for Gap, Old Navy, Athleta, and Banana Republic. This means that they are earning commission and product for posting about the brands that they work for. The program itself isn't new. It started last October just as a normal influencer setup, which meant that it was open to any creator, and that's already clocked up nearly 30,000 posts, reaching about 154 million people. But the fact that they are opening it up to employees is new. Gap is not alone in this. Starbucks has a Green Apron Creators program that they opened up a couple of months ago. Macy's has one. H&M has one. So they're all turning their staff into content creators as well.
So what is the real change here that is relevant? Because internal communications in organizations has been happening for some time. The difference here is that it's an actual measured channel, not a nice to have internal comms tool. Staff have always posted about where they work, in internal chats and so forth. What's new here is brands wrapping what they do in a structure, commission, brand guidelines, disclosures. So it's a whole process which is using the staff as the talent to produce content and measuring it. Once you measure it, it stops just being internal conversation. It starts to be something that you can use, that there's real budget against, that you promote and network. And that's when, the company is using its internal knowledge and staff.
Who knows the products better than the employees, right? No one knows the products more in depth than someone who has to deal with it all day, every day, whether it's clothes or whether it's Starbucks drinks or whatever it is. For me, my big question on this is, I think before this became an official program, there was a lot of trust in what the employees were saying, because if a Starbucks employee suggested a new Frappuccino flavor that they invented because they could play around with all of the different syrups and things, that is one thing, right? That's I worked at Starbucks a million years ago, and we used to do that. We created a mint mocha frappuccino, which didn't exist at the time, but now I believe is like a regular menu staple because we were just playing around with it, right?
I hope you've got some equity in that.
Oh God, I wish. No, sadly we did not. Although it was in Seattle, next to Starbucks HQ. So if only. But if we had gone on social media with our mint mocha frappuccino flavor that we had created, that I think is really authentic. And the trust is there when the employees are saying, oh my God, this thing is amazing. Look what we created. It feels a little less authentic if the brand is paying you to do that.
So there's a couple of things here. We've just talked about transparency and trust as being two tentpoles for engagement in content for brands, right, in the age of AI. And clearly the transparency needs to be there. So you're going to say, yes, this was created internally by Jess, who worked for Starbucks. The trust is, I think, a big issue because the more that happens, the more you are paid for content. And you are also not only paid for content, but this is your employer, and you have a relationship with them and brand guidelines. I mean, the truth is the employer is never going to let anything go out that reflects negatively on the brand. So you really have a question as to in what environment and at what point is this kind of initiative credible enough to generate trust.
That's a really good point, what you were just saying about the brand safety and employers never going to let something negative go out. That immediately destroys that trust, because I think sometimes not so much with a Frappuccino flavor, but with other things like, I know this is something that employees at Ulta do a lot. Ulta is like a Sephora type makeup and skincare retailer in the US. And I've seen this on my own social media where you'll have employees going through and saying, oh, this is really popular at our store. This is really unpopular at our store. And they absolutely do talk about things that are unpopular as well. And if brands start to create the guidelines around what people can say, then the trust is immediately gone, because okay, well, they're not allowed to talk about this particular brand in a negative way. Well, what's the point in trusting what they're saying?
Yeah, so what you're effectively doing, if you want it to be credible as a brand, is you have to create almost like a studio sandbox, the
Mm.
equivalent of a software sandbox internally, where people can experiment and be known to be able to say what they want and enable that to become public and witness that within that sandbox. So I think that's a whole different way of generating internal content. And if you're going to pay for it and do a paid campaign around that, then that also impacts the level of credibility too and the relationship itself.
That being said, I am really happy that this is happening, mostly because a lot of these employees are doing this of their own accord at this point. So it's nice to see that they're going to be getting rewarded for what they've been doing anyway. So that's just a nice added bonus for those employees who are probably, many of them, not making a ton of money on a shop floor.
Yeah, you know what? I would actually do it as an incentive scheme rather
Yeah.
than just a paid influencer scheme. I'd do it, as an internal reward system, so you get a bonus, and that changes the dynamics of it, I think, a little bit, but up to them.
So our next story is one of my favorite things to do, which is to look at some really under the radar new products. There is an AI company called Kaon. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of that. It is behind an app called Emochi, which also used to be known as Flow GPT. Some of these names.
I get the sense of why they changed the name.
Oh yeah, 100%.
That was never going to be a marketing genius there.
No. So instead of recommending you a video the way that Netflix or TikTok would, it generates one for you in real time. So as you watch and interact, it builds a story around you, essentially personalized on the fly. The way that Kaon puts it is that if the perfect video for you is never made, a normal recommendation engine is stuck. So Kaon builds one on the spot instead. Now, there is a real caveat with all of this. Most of the eye-catching numbers that come from Kaon come from them themselves. So the company says that it's got more than 2 million people using it every day for around 150 minutes each, and it's raised $60 million in a Series B round. So those numbers are impressive, but again, those are coming directly from them. There has not been an outside audit, so who knows if they are real. But if this holds up, there are some really interesting numbers here, and people are spending huge amounts of time within this app that essentially creates personalized content for them as they engage with it, which is a very interesting prospect.
Yeah, again, you and I have talked about the move towards personalization and how that is definitely the big trend, particularly when you've got competitors like Roblox where people are building and creating their own worlds. This is a really big deal for streamers. Personalized recommendations, because they haven't cracked it. It's been 20 years and it's still a very blunt instrument. We are all dissatisfied with what we have in terms of personalization and recommendations for content. We know that this is going to drive engagement and traffic, so it's really important. All personalization today is basically the same template. You swap in your name, your product, everyone gets the same thing. This is interesting because it's claiming to do something different. The story itself generated around you as you go. So the valuable thing stops being the video itself and it becomes what it's building for you every day as a new kind of generated exercise. My question is, what's the behavioral data behind it? What's it using? How does it actually work? I haven't got my head around that.
I think the more you engage with it, the more, and to be fair, this is a little bit of how like the Netflix recommendation engine works to begin with. A couple of years ago, I can't remember why, but I had to create a new Netflix profile. And I've had my Netflix for like 10 plus years at this point. So it's really built up a recommendation engine of what it knows that I like. And having to start from scratch was really weird because it was completely not what I was interested in. So I think it starts like that. It starts a little bit like you're starting completely from scratch, and the more you engage with something, the more it builds up. But then because you are engaging with things in a very different way than you would even with Netflix or even with TikTok, it like compounds over time and gets even more interactive as you go along.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there are some risks here that also exist in the current system, which is you go into your own echo chamber. So it might be personalizing. You need to balance it against the ability to recommend other content. So is this going to take you into a narrow funnel or not, is the question. You may be going through a particular period in your life where you're attracted by certain type of content. we all do, like, summer, Christmas, or whatever. And
Mm.
then what's going to happen? You're going to be stuck there for the next whatever period of time
Yeah.
until slowly they realize that you're desperately trying to leap out of it. I haven't seen the product, but I'd love to give it a try and see whether it
Yeah.
resolves some of these issues. And again, the 2 million daily users is their own numbers. So, and is it even a base on which you can actually judge and measure impact, given, how widespread streaming viewers are?
It's also really easy to lump this in with Sora. So if you remember, Sora was OpenAI's video generation app that only existed for about 6 months. It was absolutely hemorrhaging money. It cost so much money. But I think there is a differentiator here. Sora was a tool, so you gave it a prompt and it responded with a video clip, and then you do something with that video clip. So you put it on another platform or whatever. Kaon works the other way, and you go into the app and the story generates and keeps changing around you while you're in it. So it is slightly different in that sense. And I would just be really interested, because they've got to monetize somehow, right? As we just saw with Sora, it is extremely expensive to do these video generations. So I'll be interested to see how they start to bring in monetization, advertisers, and how brands could really take advantage of this. I don't think they're there quite yet.
Do you know if it's voice activated? Because I'm thinking
I don't know. I
come home from work. I layer in a mood to try and create.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
If it can solve that problem, like tonight, I feel like a dark 70s drama or something like that, or it's raining outside. I wanted to see something from the 50s, and I don't know.
It feels a little bit like. Do you remember the old Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yeah,
you remember that? It feels a little bit like that, just brought into the modern age. So there is, I guess, a little bit of precedent for it. It just is actually, it's giving you a lot more options than those books did.
Because if it's responding to that question of how do you personalize and customize on the basis of your moods, that's quite an interesting development. But I'd have to see it.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to dig into that one and come back to it.
Well, thanks for spotting that, Jess. I love the way you spot new products. It's fantastic.
It's my favorite thing to do. So for our last story, we are going back to our friends at Roblox, although it's slightly different. Last week, we were talking about Roblox's new vibe coding prompt activated game creation tool. This week, we are looking at how Roblox is really pushing to become a proper music platform. Last week, they announced a deal with an independent music distributor called Too Lost that brings thousands of independent tracks, artists like Teddy Swims and A$AP Ferg, none of whom I've ever heard of. They are bringing these into Roblox's creator store. So when people are building games, they can drop real music into their game creations. And this is alongside some really crazy big concert numbers that happen within the platform. I don't know if you know that Roblox actually has concerts. Bruno Mars did a virtual show on Roblox in January that pulled in 12.86 million people watching at the same time, which is a platform record for solo artists. There have also been some other big gigs as well. So Roblox is really making a play to become some place that you can discover and listen to music, not only play games, which I think is a really interesting move for them.
So it becomes a really significant distribution. They are taking advantage of the fact that people want to build these virtual kind of live gatherings. People want to build their own universes around it. Not 100 miles away from the kickoff of what happened with music and TikTok, it's
right.
kind of a similar principle for new bands. This is really, really interesting. Obviously, Bruno Mars is not new and will draw a lot of activity. So Roblox has been at this for some time, and there's been other attempts to do it. And even Warner Music and Universal built their own music hubs on Roblox back a couple of years ago, and considered it a form of distribution. But this is something a little bit different. Instead of a one-off concert, thousands of tracks now sit within, going back to what we were talking about earlier, within a creator store. So music is becoming part of everyday games people play. And that's why I bring in the TikTok analogy. That turns Roblox from a venue into a discovery channel, and people play with it and create content with it and share their content. It becomes associated with the personalized content, new content. It's very interesting.
I think in case people aren't aware, TikTok originally started as Musical.ly, which was a music discovery platform. It just morphed into TikTok over time. So I think the parallels are really there. If we look at it from a monetization perspective, because obviously that's what you and I are also interested in, think of the reach that some of these concerts have. Like that Bruno Mars one had 12.86 million people at one concert. No one on earth could match those numbers, even if you're on tour for, I don't even know how many years you couldn't reach those numbers. You know, maybe someone like the Rolling Stones who have been at it for
I was going to say, the Rolling Stones virtual on Roblox, once it hits an older generation.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think the younger
once
generation
it hits an older, it will eventually.
Interest. Yeah, eventually. I don't think that.
But
Gen
you know
Alpha
what's
has
interesting?
In the Rolling Stones.
It scales live.
Yeah, exactly. It scales, and so if you look
massively.
At it, but if you look at it from a monetization perspective, that is a merch store that is available to almost 13 million people, which again is a scale that no physical space could ever reach, which is very interesting.
So, you know, again, the lawyer in me kicking in. What about the rights, right?
Yeah, this is a really big thing for Roblox.
And this is an untapped area, really. This is part of, you know, how do you license rights in a world like this? How do you make sure that everything's legit, that the flow of funds and recognition of rights exists? And Roblox has a history with it. It got sued by the music publishers in 2021. It settled, and it had to build a much more structured licensing setup. It's not alone. I mean, even all the way back when, obviously, even YouTube had to acknowledge that at some stage.
Even now, there are songs that get taken off of Instagram or TikTok all the time because they've lost the licensing rights, or those conversations are always ongoing.
Yeah, right. So the pressure points, and they're the ones that create issues. There has to be some infrastructure around that has to be built to create automatic recognition. There's got to be a licensing system that actually allows this to happen. These catalog deals are a good way of doing it because that's clear. And that's why these catalog deals matter. Roblox is obviously trying to build up a supply of already cleared music, so the whole thing doesn't hang on the creators just going out and grabbing a track and using it himself.
I think that's a really important point, is that right now clearing the rights rests on the creators. So they have to hold the licenses and then prove it when Roblox asks, which puts a lot of weight on the creators. A lot of creators are not going to have the knowledge or wherewithal to be able to go and do that. So I think having the catalog of music that's already been approved is very important for them.
Yeah, but I mean, new bands don't necessarily have a catalog of music. So there is a whole market out there for people registering in a system that would allow them to have their rights automatically cleared. This is the gap that exists in this. This system for Roblox favors existing artists with big catalogs. But we know from TikTok that if it's going to be used as a way for artists to break into the market and scale their content, then you need to have an ability to create a licensing structure that keeps up with that and that's really agile. So watch this space. There's going to be businesses that actually flare up with this and do this.
Right now, this is obviously an independent label, but it'll be very interesting to see whether or not this is something that's picked up by the major labels as well. I'm sure that they're in talks at the minute to cut deals.
Yeah, because this is exactly where things are going to go. I mean, if you also look at all the different platforms, like, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or others, music has been the sort of content piece that has been the early adopter part of things. It's where the platform is validated and grows. And that's why for Roblox, this is really interesting. It's taking them out of their original audience set and really branching out into a whole different layer of relevance as a platform.
Yeah. Right. Well, that is all of our stories for the week. So it has been a pleasure, as always, talking this sort of stuff with you. And I look forward to next week.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah,
Speak
me too.
later. Bye.
Have a good week. Bye.